Hello and welcome to Two Balding Nerds. My name is Kellen,
Hey, my name is George.
and today we're going to be talking about The Batman, the most recent Batman film to come out with Robert Pattinson starring as Batman.
Right off the bat, I'd say did not blow me away. It wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be. I think this one, as far as a Batman movie goes, was just forgettable, terribly paced, but not in every way terrible. So I'd say there's a few things we could cover. Do you want to go over those first?
I just want to counter what you just said. We want to preface our comments by saying George and I both went into the movie with very low expectations. Neither of us were fans of the Robert Pattinson casting for Batman. We didn't feel like he was going to be a good fit. So like I said, we went in with very low expectations. And although there's going to be a bit of strong opinions from us on this movie, we would like to say that we were pleasantly surprised that it wasn't as bad as we were expecting. We didn't particularly enjoy most of the movie. There was a lot of things that we found reason to nitpick, but overall it was nowhere near as bad as we were expecting.
It wasn't a complete dumpster fire. I'll definitely give it that. You know what? Here's a good way to put it. It's not as bad as Joel Schumacher's Batman.
Those movies are objectively bad. Everybody agrees that those movies were bad. And
Yeah.
realistically, those movies were a product of the time. It was kind of, I think, piggybacking off of the Adam West Batman that was obviously known for being very silly.
Mhm.
And I don't know what it was about people of the 60s and whatnot and thinking that superheroes were supposed to be silly, but a lot of our superhero media back then was really goofy, and it was one of those things where that campiness kind of carried over. But we're getting away from the point here. We're talking about the Batman, and first of all, we wanted to talk about Robert Pattinson's portrayal because, as we mentioned previously, we didn't have high expectations, but George and I both agreed we felt that Robert Pattinson's portrayal of the character. Now, realistically, it's two characters, two sides of the same coin with Bruce Wayne and Batman. We felt he was a stronger Batman than he was a Bruce Wayne.
He was an okay Batman. I would say personally he was okay because he just stood there a lot of the times, which I go doesn't really take much acting chops at all. He kind of did the same thing he did in Twilight, where he just stared. Except for this time, he kind of just stared at random things instead of a particular girl he's interested in. For Batman overall, just standing there staring and brooding is not the worst thing in the world. So that's why I'm going like, okay, that's fine if he does that as Batman. But he did it a lot in this film. His dialogue was not exactly the best, but I feel like they did that on purpose because of some of the best Batman art you'll find out there is him looking down at the town or looking in this corner or whatever brewing, and people love that. So that's what you're going for. Then I go, he nailed that on the head. I just found it got a little too much throughout the film. And there was a bunch of times where I go, you could literally put any actor into the suit right there and they would have been passable because they're not doing anything.
I think it's a lot easier to portray Batman rather than Bruce Wayne, given that Batman, like you said, is it's pretty everybody knows Batman, right? And as far as Bruce Wayne goes, his portrayal, you know how some actors, especially method actors, they kind of decide how they want to portray a character, whereas sometimes in other films, the director obviously has a lot of input on the portrayal of the character. So this version of Bruce Wayne was, for lack of better words, and I don't mean to offend anybody here, but very emo, which was one of the things we were very concerned about going into the movie was that his Bruce Wayne was going to be kind of mopey and just kind of annoying, to put it bluntly.
He was the worst Bruce Wayne that's come out of Batman, period, in my opinion. He was boring.
I mean, Bruce Wayne as a character, at least in my mind, is not a mopey character. He's a broken man. He's very complex, and the way he was kind of portrayed in this movie was very one-dimensional. Even with Alfred, he was very mopey and just kind of whiny almost, which was kind of off-putting. I kind of prefer a Bruce Wayne that still has like a stronger resolve, kind of more of it's not stoicness. I think that's the word. I'm not sure, but more stoic.
The thing for me, most Bruce Waynes in the Batman shows like Christian Bale, Kevin Conroy, those two just in particular off the top of my head, both of them had more of that kind of playboy rich man they like to put on in public, even though it showed how Bruce Wayne was their mask and Batman was who they truly were.
Yeah.
So the fact that it was like he was putting in no effort to actually be Bruce Wayne. He just seemed miserable beyond belief going out as Bruce Wayne, even though I think the only scene you really get to see him out in public interacting as Bruce Wayne was the funeral, so I guess it's a more somber occasion.
I've spoken to a couple of my friends who are very big in the DC side of things as far as comic books go, and they were saying that this story for this movie was adapted from probably two or three different storylines and kind of thrown into a blender. And they were
Mhm.
saying that the reason why Bruce was so reclusive in this is because his focus, I mean, at this point, he's been at the job for 2 years. And
Yep.
so he's not particularly interested in his Bruce Wayne persona. It's all about the Batman.
Mhm.
And we do see that in this film. And I don't mind his mindset just being so laser focused on being the Batman. I don't need to see the whole playboy side of things. We know that comes later when he sort of figures out how to balance his two personas, but I just didn't resonate with the way Bruce Wayne kind of just carried himself. Like I said, he was very mopey and depressing.
Yeah, I'd say we both prefer a more stoic Batman just based off of, I think, both of our favorites being Kevin Conroy. But actually, with that being said, that makes me think one of the most important things that makes a good Batman is the good villains. And once again, this film kind of landed on a meh on the villains. A couple were, I'd say, good, and some like totally missed the boat.
We talked about this after the movie, and we both unanimously agreed. The Riddler felt more like the Joker light, like a
Mhm.
diet Joker sort of thing. And we didn't quite understand the motivation here. And I mean, let's be honest, we haven't read all the comic books, so I'm sure there's an explanation in some comic book storyline that we're not privy to. But I didn't feel like this was the Riddler. It felt like the
There you
Joker
go.
for most of the movie, especially with the whole plot to blow up the seawall. I'd had the Joker written all over it, so it was just a little bit weird.
If they had removed the riddles from his plot, it would have been completely unconnected to Riddler at all. It just was so all over the place.
Well, the funny thing is, it's like we've seen in certain Batman media where the Joker even likes to give Batman little riddles to figure out his little schemes. So, in a sense, it did still feel like the Joker, but it was the Riddler instead.
And the other one too, I can say with the Riddler more, so that was irritating me after thinking about it more. He looked a lot like Hush. You know that character?
Yeah, that's what I've been reading online a lot. Is that he was kind of the Riddler in this movie was a little bit influenced by the Hush storyline.
Which I go, then just go with the Hush villain instead. It's a really good storyline.
Yeah,
So why they chose to make the Riddler so, I would say lack of a better word, crazy, which I go, the Riddler is insane in a certain level, but it's a very different insanity compared to the off the wall craziness that the Joker does.
it's a more like reined in, sort of intelligent, sort of crazy, whereas the Joker is just psychotic.
I think they did the good job though with Penguin. Colin Farrell, I think, did a very good job, and I thought his prosthetics looked great too. I would not have known it was him if someone had not told me beforehand.
It's funny. A lot of our opinions on this movie are very contrary to what I'm reading online. It seems like a lot of people online did not like Colin Farrell's version of the Penguin, and my only gripe was that I'm really used to the Penguin having a sort of a Cockney British accent, which was not present in this movie, so it was a little bit weird. I
Mm.
mentioned to you when we talked about it after the movie, it almost sounded like he was doing a bad Robert De Niro impression.
Yeah,
And I mean, I was not used to the idea of the Penguin sort of being a right hand henchman as opposed to being an actual real threat to Batman. And he wasn't really any sort of a threat to Batman in this movie at all. He was kind of a pushover, which was a little bit weird to see.
well, I didn't actually mind because, like, when I think of Penguin, certain times he was an actual physical threat. More so, he usually is kind of like Batman's go-to for the white collar crimes that happen in the Batman universe. Because, like, the Iceberg Lounge that was featured in this film, which made me happy.
I was really hoping to see like actual ice in this iceberg lounge,
Yeah,
like
I
in the Arkham series, and there wasn't. I was kind of disappointed about that.
yeah, like in the original animated series too. That was a little disappointing, but I understand them being like, okay, trying to ground it a little bit more realism, like DC likes to try and do. It's a little out there to be like, oh, look, he has a walrus just in the middle of his club.
But I mean, wouldn't that be a cool draw to go to a club that is literally like covered in ice? You know, like it's a gimmick,
Mm.
right? That kind of puts bums in the seats. So I think even though this was a more grounded universe, I still think it would fit, but to each their own.
I think it'd make the place pretty cool. Anyways, so with that being said, then there was Falcone.
Yeah, or Falcone. I mean, I'm so used to pronouncing it Falcone, and hearing them constantly pronounce it Falcone, it was like nails on a chalkboard for me.
He was okay. I thought his character was done fine. I found it funny that he like never took off his glasses, but
Yeah, the character was fine, but the casting literally had me chuckling in the movie theater when I first saw that it was John Turturro. And the funny thing is, as I was texting a buddy of mine, and I was like, "Oh, hey, did you see the movie?" And he's like, "Yeah." And we ended up getting to talking about Falcone, and he literally said the exact same thing I said to you after the movie, was that I couldn't get over it being John Turturro and his crazy character from the Transformers movies. I could not take him seriously at all. Quite honestly, he did a pretty admirable job, but like that mental block in my brain just didn't allow me to sort of get over the fact that he was kind of goofy at the same
mhm.
time.
With that being said, what did you think of the three cast members who weren't villains, which was Catwoman, Gordon, and Alfred? Personally, I think all three of them were fine. Were pretty good actually. Alfred being maybe the weakest of the three, just because he got the least screen time.
I really liked Jim Gordon in this one, which is portrayed by Jeffrey Wright. He's a very good
Yep,
actor,
he
and
was the right man for the role.
yeah, he was very good as Jim Gordon. I wasn't so hot on Zoe Kravitz's version of Selena Kyle. She was kind of bland. I mean, yeah, she was a little bit sassy, but ultimately her chemistry with Robert Pattinson in the movie felt kind of bland and stale.
Is that really her fault or more Robert Pattinson's fault?
I'm not sure because I mean we both agree that at least in our opinions, remember guys, this is our opinions. They're not great actors. They're okay, and like you put two of them together and you get kind of meh, right? It's one of those things where if you have a very charismatic actor and a kind of a boring actor, it's okay because at least the charismatic one can carry the load. But when you put two kind of meh actors together, you get meh. It's one of those things, right? So
In all honesty, I don't really have an issue with Zoe Kravitz. I think she was fine.
no, neither do I. I don't have an issue. I don't feel like the two of them as a pair were all that convincing. I felt like their relationship in the movie was very forced because oh, Batman and Catwoman, they're always an item in the Batman storylines, right? So it felt like it was more of a oh, this needs to happen rather than it happened sort of in a natural convincing way on screen.
I definitely lean towards it being Robert Pattinson's fault because there was just nothing there half the time when he was staring at a crime scene or when he was staring at her. It was the same type of staring.
Yeah.
I don't know what she really had to go off of being like, oh, I like how he stares blankly. Neat.
Going back to Jim Gordon and Jeffrey Wright's portrayal, I don't really have much to say other than it was just great.
Yeah, he was great.
I really enjoyed his portrayal. He was like nail on the head, spot on. He was Jim Gordon. I wouldn't compare him to Gary Oldman because I think Gary Oldman's portrayal of Jim Gordon is like chef's kiss, like perfection. But his was pretty damn close, and I think that's pretty high praise. But as far as Andy Serkis being Alfred, I mentioned to you after the movie, I said he wasn't in the movie enough
Hmm.
to justify being in the movie, which I found very disappointing because I feel like Alfred, of course, is Bruce's moral compass,
Hmm.
and he's needed in that movie to sort of guide him and watch over him and make sure he doesn't get himself killed because ultimately, like he says in the movie, I don't care if I die. And Alfred realizes that. So it was a little bit disappointing that he wasn't in the movie more because I
Hmm.
love seeing that dynamic. And I think that dynamic was portrayed very well in the Dark Knight series with Michael Caine and Christian Bale.
I'd say he didn't do a bad job as Alfred in this film.
No, not at all.
He just didn't have like maybe he had 15 minutes of screen time, maybe.
No, not even.
Like
I would say probably 5 minutes.
actually, yeah, no. Yeah, something under 10. I think you're right. I'm
Yeah,
sure something under 10. Because so at that point, I go, you can barely get any emotional attachment to him because it's like,
exactly.
oh, it's Alfred. Oh, Alfred's not okay. Oh, Alfred's okay. Oh, well, okay. Like moving on. And that falls under where I go, a lot of the actors, except for obviously, I'm not happy with Robert Pattinson, I think did the best what they could with what they had because a lot of them, I think, were directed into a wrong direction completely with a bunch of the things in this film. Speaking of which, with wrong direction, one my biggest, absolute biggest gripe of this film I want to tackle, which was the fact that Batman was literally one of the worst detectives I've ever seen in a film, and it drove me mental throughout the whole thing. He actually never even solved Riddler's big plot. It all came to fruition. He was just able to kind of fix the plot once it was in motion, but at one point, like, headed him off and figured it out beforehand. So I was like, well, Riddler outsmarted him the whole way. It was just Riddler was so nuts at the end where he's like, oh, you're going to join me, right? And he goes, no. And he goes, shock. This has thrown my whole world into a tizzy.
It's funny. A lot of the diehards are saying, "Oh, he was the best detective," and I have to agree with you that he was kind of always one step behind. And I mean, a lot of times in Batman media, while he's a great detective, he is usually a step behind until the very end when he reveals, like, "Oh, all along I knew this, that, and the next thing, and I was kind of playing along."
Mhm.
And he wasn't playing along in this. He was legitimately a step behind the entire way,
Yeah.
uh, to the point of spoilers. He brings Falcone out of the club and gets Falcone killed.
Mhm.
And only when he realizes that he's under a street light and he recalls something in one of the cards that the Riddler wrote to him, bring the rat out into the light. And he goes, oh, duh. He sort of figures it out at the end after it's too late and the guy's dead on the pavement. And it kind of had you doing a face palm, like, Batman's supposed to be smarter than this. And the
Yeah.
whole thing with him going to Arkham and visiting Riddler and Riddler kind of monologuing his plan and all that kind of stuff. And then him finally realizing that, oh, he's blowing up the seawall. Oh, yeah, by the way, it's too late. It's happening right now while you're at Arkham Asylum. And like you said, the Riddler ultimately ends up winning in this movie.
Mhm.
And the movie ends on kind of a sour note, but there's a bit of a moral victory for Bruce where he figures out in the end that his motivation of vengeance is not what he should be projecting out there. He should be a symbol of hope.
Mhm.
And so he kind of realizes that at the end when he's helping people out of the wreckage that he shouldn't be seen as a symbol of vengeance, but a symbol of hope for the city of Gotham. I mean, I think that was a good message, a good note to end it on.
Just before we move on with the topic of him being a not so good detective, I will point out that he was very good at riddles. So, like, anytime the Riddler threw a riddle out, he got it instantly, which I was like, okay, there's that. But then at the same time, there was at one point I was literally about to start yelling at the movie. I was getting so frustrated. He left a riddle and it was in Spanish, and he was like, oh, a rat with wings. What could that be? It could be
Yeah.
maybe a pigeon. And I'm like, for God's sake, you're dressed up as a bat. Everyone calls a bat a rat with wings. Come on.
Yeah.
Like, it drove me mental. I think the Penguin eventually said it to him, being like, sounds like a bat. Duh.
It was one of those things where they mentioned it like 3 or 4 times in about a 20-minute span.
Mhm.
And like you said, it got to the point near the end there where you just wanted to, like, grab him by the face and scream, "It's a bat! How stupid are you?" Sort of thing. It was like the movie was beating you over the head with it. And you watch enough of the Batman animated series, and they literally call him a rat with wings, I think, in a couple of the episodes.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that I could not get over like that in particular. And there was another scene where he used carpet puller or something like that.
Carpet Tucker.
Yeah, carpet tucker, and literally, if it weren't for the guy in the room saying, "Hey, that's a carpet tucker," my uncle used to use, he probably wouldn't have ever figured that one out either. Like, this one wasn't so much Batman being the problem, but even in Riddler's place where they're like, "Oh, that rat doesn't like you," and he goes, "That's not a rat." I'm like, "Okay, who the hell looks at a bat and mistakes it for a rat?" That's like saying, "Oh, I mistaken your cat for a rabbit." It's like,
Yeah.
okay, they're both furry and that's about it. So there was so many times that him as a detective, I just was like literally smacking my head in the theater going like, "Come on, I can figure this
Yeah.
out." And Batman, who's supposed to be near genius intellect, cannot figure out half this stuff. Like in the animated series, he could just speak Russian out of the blue because he was so damn smart.
Well, that's the thing is this portrayal. Obviously, there was not a lot of backstory given as far as his life before being Batman, but in the animated series, and they touched on it a bit in the Dark Knight trilogy, showing him going to train with the League of Shadows and stuff like that. But in the animated series, because I've been watching it again lately, they make a point in a lot of the episodes showing Bruce as a young man going and training with various different people.
Hmm.
Like there's one where he trains with a magician.
Yeah, as Lieutenant's father.
Yeah, and that's how he becomes a master escape artist
Hmm.
and a master of illusions. And then there's another episode where he's actually living in Japan and training under a martial arts master and stuff like that. So it shows his progression and how he came to be how he is. Whereas this one, it was kind of just like he was more of a brawler. And I know you're going to get people that'll come out of the woodwork and say, oh, well, he's figuring it out. He's figuring it out. I get that. But I prefer the story told where Bruce has it all figured out and then becomes Batman. Like he's prepared and doesn't sort of just like jump into it half-assed and figures it out as he goes. Like he's a very calculated character, and we didn't see that here.
I think that's a good point. And even then, like in Batman Begins, they showed Batman being clumsy and learning, but he was learning in the sense like you saw him jump off the building when he like first threatened Gordon or tried to get information from Gordon, and he crashes and burns as he like falls and hurts himself, and then he goes immediately to Fox afterwards being like, okay, I just learned jumping without a cape that can glide is a bad idea, so he kind of adjusted. Whereas this one, it's like, nope, it just everything he did just constantly he tried something and it kind of crashed and burned, and it's just like, huh, didn't learn from that, and he moved along.
Our bias is showing a little bit toward the Dark Knight trilogy, but realistically, and I know a lot of people are praising this one because it was quote unquote grounded, and I thought that the Nolan trilogy was very grounded. So it's not like this is a new sort of concept that we're getting, that we're in a more grounded universe. But I did want to talk about the runtime of the movie. I know we had discussed this before, and we both agreed that the movie was probably about a half an hour at least too long. There was a lot of points in the movie where during like the crime scenes where he's kind of just strutting around the crime scene and staring blankly into the camera, it would just like focus on him for multiple seconds. And it was kind of one of those things where you're sitting there as a movie watcher. And I know a lot of people, especially the fanboys, are going, oh, it was excellent. You don't have to cut anything. And I felt like you could achieve the same result with shorter time. Like you didn't need to focus on him staring into the camera for 8 seconds. Like you could have cut it down to three, and just like trim little bits off to the point where you're at, maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and a half. And then there was also the endings. There was multiple endings. It was challenging Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, and Avengers Endgame for the most endings. And I remember sitting in the theater and I was like, "Oh my god, just end already!" There was a lot of points that would have been fitting endings, and then it's like, "No, we're gonna keep going."
Yeah, the last 15 minutes easily of the film just dragged on. It would not stop. So that easily right there, 15 minutes of the film could have been cut. And yeah, throughout the film, it's like there was a few scenes, like once again mentioning cinematography wise, was good in this film, where he did come out of the shadows or whatever, and it was a really cool scene. But it lost its effect after I think like the third or fourth time he did that. Or as you said, just
Yeah,
walking through a crime scene where it kind of repeated itself several times where it's like, "Hey, chief, you can't bring this guy in here." "Oh, I guess he's already here, so whatever." It's like
yeah,
we could have done with one less of that kind of build up to the scene or whatever. So the pacing and the timing of it really did not need to be so long. It would have helped kind of that sense of like a kind of a boringness of it. And with that being said,
yeah.
actually, when I was in the theater around 45 minutes in, because the pacing was getting so bad and I was legitimately getting bored, I checked my time on my phone, being like, "Oh God, it's only 45 minutes in." Yeah,
Yeah, there's still 2 hours left.
yeah. So overall, anytime you're in a film, if you go, "I wonder what time it is," and then you take the effort to take your phone out to take a look at the time, is not a very good sign. And that's, I would say, definitely at that point, it was just purely based off of the pacing. Because at first I was like, "Oh, okay, cinematography wise, it's good,"
Yeah, it was excellent.
but the like, even the music was excellent too. So there were certain things that usually are big to me that wasn't compensating for the other glaring flaws.
Well, I do recall looking at my phone at the end of the movie, and I remember saying to you, "Oh, that was only 2 hours and 45 minutes," because I think what they do now is they include the credits into the runtime of the movie. I don't know why, because it's not like the credits are a part of the movie. I mean, they are, but they're not part of the movie's story. So I don't
Mhm.
know why they include that in the runtime. So although it has an advertised runtime of 2 hours and 56 minutes, the movie's actually closer to about 2 hours and 45. So, like we mentioned before, we feel that if you had cut it down to about 2 hours and 15, it would have really made the story paced a lot better, a lot smoother too. And like I said, I get it was a stylistic choice to kind of drag out some scenes, but I felt like some scenes were it was just unnecessary to drag it out. And like you said, it starts contributing to that boredom, that antsiness. Like, let's get going with the story. I don't need to see 5 seconds of Pattinson staring into the camera creepily.
Mm.
We also felt like the movie probably could have benefited from I wouldn't say similar direction, but similar rating to a movie like Logan, which was rated R. We
Mhm.
we felt like this movie should have been at least 14A or something like that, and included a little bit more gruesomeness. A little bit
Yeah.
more of that brutality from Bruce.
Or just in general, even like Joker, considering that they've been doing it for quite some time and they keep saying it with Batman, where they go, "Oh, we really want it to be in a much more like grounded world where this is much more plausible and all that jazz." I go, "Well, then you got to show once in a while someone having a bloody nose or something."
Well, they did mention in the movie he's like, "Oh, it looks like I broke his nose," but like you said, there's no blood, and I know that's one of those things that gets the movie rating people in a tizzy is, "Oh, there's too much blood, there's too much this, too much that,"
Mhm.
and they're really strict. And one of the things you mentioned specifically after we watched the movie is you said, "I wish we could have just seen him break somebody's arm or something like that."
That would have at least shown his more kind of commitment to really stopping the quote unquote bad guys.
Yeah,
And I go like, especially when you think about it, and it's like, okay, so the same studio that brought us Joker, where he like murdered someone with a pen, and it was really violent and really jarring. They then have the hero. They don't even show like when someone does get murdered, like at the first murder, the mayor, I think it was at the beginning. They said, "Oh, look at all the blood," and it's like, but there was no blood. Like, you didn't see it,
hmm
so I was like, I was so confused by that, and there was an even another scene where he literally beats a guy, like, half to death, and he was wearing a mask when he got beaten up. To take off the mask, dude looks banged up, but I'm going like, "That guy's face should be imploded with how much, Batman was beating the
yeah.
crap out of him. He should look like the Joker from the Robot Chicken sketch that they did once."
You're talking about at the end there when he's beating up one of the Riddler's goons,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And it looks like he's taken either adrenaline. A lot of people are theorizing, like yourself, that it was
Yeah, I think it
Venom.
was Venom because it was green.
Yeah, and so I totally agree with the way he was smashing his face in with his fist. I'm like, that dude should have been dead.
Yeah.
Never mind, like, okay, and not even a bloodied face, but like he should have been
Yeah,
dead.
no, he shoulda looked like what happened if he got run over by a freaking, steamroller.
Yeah, he was wailing on the guy's face like full
Mhm.
fury, and it didn't even look like he had a scratch on him afterwards when they showed the guy's face.
Out of curiosity, I was wondering, I can't remember how you thought of this, but the Batmobile in general, what do you think of it?
Okay, so I'm a bit torn on the Batmobile. You know me, I'm a car
Mhm,
guy. I like my big engines and the loud exhaust and stuff like that.
mhm.
So for this Batmobile, on pure sound alone, I'm gonna give it a 10 because it sounded so good. And I would attribute this more to the cinematography, but watching it fire up the jet engine on the back,
Mhm.
just the way that like the angle that they shot it at and the way it showed, it looked really good. But then like the overall appearance of it was just kind of meh. I didn't really like the appearance. And then secondly, I was kind of hoping for more gadgets, like we're kind of used to on Batmobiles. They tend to have gadgets and bombs and shit like that. And there wasn't anything from this one. It was basically just like an armored vehicle with bulletproof glass, and that was pretty much it.
Mhm.
So it was kind of a letdown, to be honest. And I know, again, people are going to come out and they're going to be like, oh, he's just starting out. He's just starting out. And I'm like, I'm sorry, the guy's a billionaire.
And
He could probably figure something out. And he's, like you said, near genius level intellect. He can make something better.
and he's also still once again, this is 2 years into what he's been doing, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure why he wouldn't have a better Batmobile at this point. Overall, I would say I'm
Yeah.
not too picky on the Batmobile. I had 2 major gripes about it, and actually major is not accurate either, just 2 gripes. I would say 1, when it was revving up, yes, I love the sound of the engine, but with all the lights and stuff going off, I kinda made me go like, "Okay, this kinda looks more like an action figure," and it kinda reminded me of the Batman and Robin Batmobile with how it was all light up and flashy and stuff, where I go, to me, Batmobile should not have flashy lights and everything other than the flame at the back, just because that's tradition.
Yeah.
But like, I can definitely say my favorite Batmobile is the one from Tim Burton, but the one that I thought was the best Batmobile as far as just, yeah, that makes sense, was the Tumbler from the Christopher Nolan ones. And the other thing I have to say about the Batmobile scene that really threw me off was as it revved up and it was like, oh, it's something badass is about to happen. It then did like a lurching start stop thing I was like, "What, did he put it into neutral or something? Like, what happened?"
It looked like he stalled it out or
Yeah.
something. It was really weird. That scene in particular. It was almost like he was challenging the penguin to run.
Mhm.
And he was like, "Go ahead, I'll give you a head start, and then I'll catch you."
Yeah, and, like, that's the other one too, is I go, like, if that was the case, because I think is the most logical guess of why that happened, other than he stalled it. Uh, I go, if he was doing it to kinda like, "Go on, I'll give you a head start," like, trying to spook him or whatever, I go, "Well, I thought you were vengeance and you're just wanting to get the job done. Now it looks like you're just
Yeah.
enjoying chasing down someone in your car because 'cause you're like, I have this car, I kinda wanna do a chase scene. Can you please, like, start running?'"
To some degree, I think Bruce does enjoy what he does. I think he does get some sort of satisfaction out of beating the shit out of people at night, and everything else that he does as Batman.
Just thinking of that lunge and everything, that was a point that I could not stand in this film, and I was wondering what you think. I found Batman extremely clumsy in this, to the point of like comedically bad at certain things. Like he flung through a window at one point, and he like full blown pratfall rolled through the window and then got back up, and it was like, oh, thank God no one was there to see that. I openly laughed in the theater when he went through a window, which I'm like, it shouldn't have happened. He's once again 2 years into the job. He should be pretty good at this by now.
It's like we discussed earlier how in this movie he had like zero stealth skills.
Mhm.
3 times he goes to the Iceberg Lounge. First time he goes and knocks on the front door in his fucking Batman costume, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Find some way else into the building. Like, why are you knocking on the front door? And talking to bouncers.
He, like, tried to Jehovah Witness them there. He was like, "Hey, do you know who I am?" And they went, "No," and they just slammed the door on him. Like, I wanna know what was his thought process being like, "Uh-oh, I didn't plan for this. Well, how hell do I do? Oh, thank God, they're opening the door again." What was that? That was such a bizarre move. I just can't even wrap my mind around it.
The third time he gets into the Iceberg Lounge, he finally decides to go the stealth way,
Mhm.
but it's only because he's out of costume, but he's still got like black makeup around his eyes like an idiot.
Yeah.
And when that happened, I literally laughed out in the theater because I was like, this is just ridiculous. Why would you be going into the Iceberg Lounge looking like that? I know he's got his hat on and his hoodie up or whatever, but it's like all you need to do is accidentally run into somebody and they're like, hey, what's with the black eye makeup?
Yeah, "Hey, what's with black eye makeup? Hey, what's in the bag? Hey, you might be Batman."
Yeah. Yeah, what's in the bag? Oh, look at this. Mystery solved. That's all it would
I'm
take.
trying to think, he did something else that was kinda clumsy in the film, and now I'm forgetting it.
It's probably that wingsuit scene where he jumps off
Oh, yes,
of
that's it.
the police building. Yeah, and I'm watching that scene, and I don't know if you've seen like videos with those wingsuits.
Mhm,
They're essentially gliding suits,
mhm.
and they do have parachutes. And I'm thinking, okay, he's going to jump off and he's going to glide away somewhere. And I'm watching the scene. I'm like, okay, he's getting really close to the ground. When is he going to use his chute? And he just decides to use his chute as he's like flying under a bridge. So his chute gets caught on the bridge, and he just absolutely eats like the worst shit ever,
Yep.
and like smokes into a car. And he just gets up right afterwards and walks away like it was nothing. And I was like, dude, you're not getting up after that, especially like earlier in the movie. There's like a realistic scene, although kind of unrealistic. He's like 2 feet away from an explosion, gets blown across the room, and gets knocked out. And it's like, okay, you'd expect that would kill most people. Okay, you're going to give him the benefit of the doubt because of his suit.
Yeah.
At least in that scene, he gets knocked out. So you're like, okay, it's somewhat believable. I can suspend belief enough to say that, yeah, okay, getting knocked out is fair. In this scene, he just like gets up, brushes himself off, and he's like totally fine. And it's like, dude, you're not getting up after an impact like that.
Yep.
I don't care if you're wearing the bat suit or not.
Yeah, no, and I agree. That was the one that I was thinking of where, yeah, he glided down, he pulled the chute. First of all, the force that would have happened, like, of just that chute tugging on
The
him.
amount of G's that he was
Yeah,
pulling, holy
and then I
shit.
think he actually hit a truck or, like, a bus, and then
Yeah, it was the top
yeah,
of a
and
bus.
then a car. So I'm like, he's
Yeah.
he was flying, literally flying, and then he hit, like if you hit a moving vehicle, with any speed, it's combined speed. So if the car's hitting 60 and you are hit at 60, you're hitting it at like 120 kilometers of speed. So it's like,
That's not quite how the formula works, but I get what you're saying. And I just want to quickly correct. He actually the chute hits the
mhm.
bridge. He swings upwards into the underside of the bridge deck. Then he hits the bus.
It's
Then
the
he hits
car,
a car.
yes.
Yeah, so there's like 3 impacts there in all about of a
And then he
second.
does get up and he limps away, so I'll give him that. But then the next scene, he's totally
Yeah,
fine. And like I'm going, as you were just saying, it's like, no, there's no, you're totally fine. if you're lucky enough to survive that, you are a paraplegic for life. Like,
Maybe not a paraplegic, but you're definitely fucked up for a
yeah,
little
like
while.
there's no way. And so I find it funny where it's like, oh, they're trying to make it more realistic.
And then shit like that happens. So it's like you can't have it both ways.
Basic human anatomy, where it's like, no, you can't survive crap like that.
Dude, the amount of internal bleeding he would have suffered from an impact like that would be
Yeah,
insane.
exactly.
His poor brain would have just been rattled around in his head. He'd be concussed like so bad. It would probably even be like from an impact like that. Like I know in some serious impacts that the brain gets rocked around so much in your head, like it actually severs the
Oh, the connection,
yeah,
yeah, from the
the
spine.
yeah, and it just like
Yeah.
it's lights out. You're dead.
Yeah, exactly. No,
So
he was at that point the Dark Knight, and he was should have been dead as a doornail.
the dead
Um,
knight.
I do, appreciate the thought of being like, "Hey, he's training or whatever," but, like, the
Yeah.
incidents that happened when he was still learning how to be Batman in the Christopher Nolan ones were not severe enough that you were like, "Oh, he's dead." These ones, I'm like, "No, no, he's dead. He's
Yeah.
dead as it comes," and some other incidents where it's just like, that's just clumsy or strange, like I said, trying to knock on the door of the Iceberg Lounge and be like, "Hey, can I come in?" "No." Slam. It's like, "Oh."
Yeah, I didn't understand that at all. I'm like, why are you knocking on the front door like some child? Figure out a way in stealthily and get to your objective. That's what I'm used to seeing. Yeah,
It's
world's
Grace
greatest
Detective.
detective. Yeah.
Yes.
What did you think overall for the movie?
When I first saw it, I was hemming and hawing, going, "You know what? I think I could give it like a 6 or 7 out of 10 kind of idea."
Yeah.
But now after thinking about it more and more, I have so many gripes about the film. I have to place it at a 6 out of 10. It passes. I'd say going to see it if you're a Batman's fan is fair, but there's so many things where I'm really not understanding. Like, I've seen ratings. I think it was like Rotten Tomatoes had it 86 for critics and 89 or 90 for fans. And I'm really not seeing how it's getting either. The critic one makes more sense to me because the cinematography was good and the music was good.
You got to take into account that all the diehard fanboys are going to go see it on the first weekend, and then they're going to go and immediately rate it, right? So you kind of have to, with movies like this that are that high profile, you usually got to give it about a month or two for the ratings to sort of even out, so you get more of a general idea from a more broad audience, right?
I get what you're saying, and I agree generally. However, I'd say more so too is I go like, Batman's my favorite hero without question.
Yeah,
So I would have thought more people who go Batman's their favorite, like a few I've talked to, have had similar reactions to me where they went, "Well, the phone wasn't bad," but they were going like, "It's definitely not my favorite Batman. It's nowhere close to it."
yeah.
So, and I look at when they say, "Oh, what's their favorite Batman?" I look at other ratings. I go, "It's close to that rating right now." I would have thought a lot of them would have gone out and if they were reviewing it, would have said like, "Oh, wow, it's really not that good," like what we're doing. But majority of things I see online currently are saying it's still really good. So I'm just a little bit mystified by that.
I think The Dark Knight is gonna be the hard one to top.
Mhm.
Realistically, that movie is so sound.
Mhm.
Between the pacing, the action, the story, the twists and turns that happen in that movie, it's an excellent movie from pretty much start to finish. And I remember on multiple occasions where I'd rewatch the movie, and I'd be close to the end. I'm like, holy crap, that was fast. Like I
Mhm.
didn't realize this movie is that short, but it's like 2 hours and 15 minutes or whatever. It's not a short movie by any means, but
No.
it feels like a short movie because of how well the movie's paced.
Mhm.
And like I never get tired of rewatching that movie. So I mean, yeah, I think in all reality we've been a little bit hard on this movie. I don't think it was as bad as I was expecting, obviously. There was
Yeah.
a few pleasant surprises. Like I thought he was gonna be terrible as Batman going into the movie, and I didn't have high hopes, but we were both kind of, like I said before, pleasantly surprised with how well he carried himself as Batman. But like you said, is you slap a Batman suit on just about anybody, and they're going to be pretty convincing, right? So
Mhm.
ultimately, for me, I'm not going to let the gripes affect my rating all that much. My rating usually comes down to the story, and I didn't really particularly like what they did with the Riddler, how they kind of changed him from his usual more intellectual, calm, collected self to kind of being more like the Joker. And
Mhm.
I'll agree with a lot of people. The Joker is a little bit played out at this point. We've seen the Joker way too much, and I know that they're looking to do a sequel to this movie, and I really hope that if they do a sequel, that they use one of the lesser known villains and not something that's been used recently, like Scarecrow or Bane and stuff like that. And they go into his rogue gallery because there's a lot of villains to pick from.
Oh yeah, no, Batman has the best rogue galleries of any character. Maybe I'd say next best one I can think of is Spider-Man. So
Yeah,
there's no shortage of characters to pick from. I do understand why though DC would be hard pressed not to go for Joker,
yeah,
just because now let's face it, in the last maybe 15 or so years, two of the people they had play the Joker have won an Oscar. So it's kind of hard to resist not doing it again and
yeah.
getting that type of fame and glory from that. And also, as much as I go, yeah, Batman does have an incredibly good rogues gallery. There's about I'd say 5 to maybe 10, depending on the fan, who can say that those ones are really good. But almost everyone would say the Joker is his number one villain because
Hmm.
it's so iconic and everything. So that's tricky. But
Yeah.
yeah, I personally would say, yeah, the leaning more towards Hush, leaning more towards the oh shoot, I is it the Owl Society or the
A Court of Owls.
Court of Owls? Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, the Court of Owls. Like heck, they could still go for something more out there, like Killer Croc. There's so many good villains that they could pick from, and
They haven't used Clayface yet. That would be a pretty interesting one.
Clayface would be an interesting one. It'd be heavy CGI, but still, I
I mean, that's not a problem nowadays, right? So,
true. It also doesn't help when they are constantly trying to keep Batman in realism for his more out there villains like Clayface and Killer Croc.
eh.
But either way, what would you give it out of 10? I'm curious.
I think my initial reaction was that the movie was like a 6.5, 7. And I think I was being a little bit generous, but I think at least for me, and I know a lot of people are gonna probably be pissy with our ratings, but I think it was a solid 6.5. It was
Mm,
not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I think people are overrating it. There's a thing called recency bias, right? So a lot of people online are saying, "Oh, this is the best Batman movie ever. This is, the best
um,
Batman ever." And I'm like, is it really though, or is it just like recency bias because we haven't had any Batman related projects since what was Justice League, right? And that was when
mm,
did Justice League come out? Was that 2019 or 2018? It was a while ago.
can't
And
remember.
either way, we haven't had any Batman related stuff for a while, so everybody's clamoring to, "Oh, this is a new Batman. It's amazing." Whether it is
Mm,
or not, objectively. And I appreciate everyone has their own opinions, and that's why we're here. We're sharing ours.
yep.
So I think it was a solid 6.5. And I will say that it is a movie that I do kind of want to watch again. I feel like my opinion might change on a subsequent rewatch. So I know this one's coming out. I think they said it was coming out in June to DVD and streaming and stuff like that. So maybe sometime in June I'll rewatch it and maybe my opinion will change a little bit. So, but right now, definitely a solid 6.5, maybe 7. I don't know. I just want to throw one quick thing in while we're talking about things being on streaming and DVD and all that kind of stuff. It was actually announced today that they are moving forward, and this was actually announced on the DC Facebook page, was that they are moving ahead with a Penguin HBO Max series.
I watched that. He was really good in the film.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed him, which is funny because I think I mentioned this earlier was that a lot of people didn't really like his portrayal, and I thought he was pretty entertaining, albeit the weird Robert De Niro impression.
I'd say he was one of the highlights of the film, in my opinion. So I'd be happy to check that out. I just have to get HBO again.
I think I mooch it off of my mom, so I'll probably end up watching that at some point, and if I don't, I'm sure there's definitely ways to view it. So I am looking forward to it, but I don't imagine we'll see it for, I would imagine, probably a year, unless they've
Probably.
been like filming it in secret and they're just waiting to release it. You would
Mhm.
make sense to release it kind of close-ish to the movie's release so that it's still relevant, but we'll see when it ends up coming out.
We want to hear what others think of it too. So please leave comments in the comment section below.
And let us know who your favorite Batman is. That's what I want to know.
Absolutely. Form a list. Let us know, and maybe we'll form our list in a near future video as well.
Alrighty. Until next time, folks, don't forget, like and subscribe if you enjoy what you watched, and we will see you guys next time.
See you next time on Two Balding Nerds.